Welcome, I'm John Glanville, and this is video 45 in my Calmness in Mind series, where we explore common sense solutions for your calmer life. And I've called this video John's Big Theory of Everything, where I will bring together and strive to combine all the various concepts that I've shared into a practical blueprint, a comprehensive model for living, which helped me to find calmness, courage, and self-compassion. And it's important to note the concepts I share here, they're personal, okay? And they may not align with your beliefs, which in my world is completely acceptable. You know, as the narratives that I've used to break free from my own limitations may differ from the narratives that you need to break free from yours. And I can acknowledge and I can respect that we each have individual beliefs based on our personality types, our cultures, and our living conditions. So instead of trying to conform, I would say let us celebrate our differences, and can we embrace creating the right new perspectives we each require so that we can expand and grow emotionally. Now, I can't remember when, but one day after reading all the books and going on all the courses, I just suddenly woke up to the fact that it was only me who was responsible for the experience of my life, nobody else, okay? And as I pondered my life, I found myself increasingly intrigued by the connection between the outer world, which I was taught is reality and governed by the rules of science, and my inner subjective experience, which included how my senses and brain interpreted that outer reality and how in turn that affected my thoughts and my feelings. And initially I thought that exploring that outer world reality in depth would offer me the answers that I sought to stop my mind from asking these questions, okay, and to stop the anxiety that came up from not being able to understand it. However, the more I learned and the more I reflected on this, I've now come to the conclusion that the nature of reality is subjective. And reality can only be comprehended by the individual observer that's looking out at it. And this meant I had to change my conditioned thinking to acknowledge that reality was not out there. Reality was my inner reality. Reality was my inner experience, and that was my reality. And even if it didn't align with the objective happenings outside of me, that was okay. Let me try and give you an example. Like a mother loving a child, but that child thinking it wasn't loved. It is the child's reality that he feels like he isn't loved, no matter what the mother does. And especially if that child had over time internalized that story into a belief system, you know, of being unlovable. And then that would extend to unconsciously cloud all his thoughts as an adult. So I had to learn that it was entirely possible for those around me to be having different perceptions and different experiences of the same outer world we were all experiencing. Yeah? And that I should try to become open, more open, to understanding and respecting those differences, yet still working on making my inner reality as pleasant as I could make it. And because during my childhood, my senses had been conditioned to be more orientated to search for perceived fear or perceived danger outside of me, then if I was going to be smart, I would need to recalibrate my senses and my brain in new ways, okay, so that it may orientate them towards registering the good aspects in life rather than just looking for all the scary or sad ones. I hope this is making sense. Could I recalibrate my senses to more pleasant settings where just by default they'd filter out pessimism and focus on optimism? Just by default they would filter out doubt and align with trust. Because if I was honest, that was the new subjective reality that I wished to experience regardless of the truth of any situation around me, because I was looking for calmness and I was looking for happiness and I was looking for a sense of pleasure within myself. So I consciously decided to train my thoughts to see the best in people and to focus on their positive characteristics and to focus on optimistic outcomes, even when my life was going through some very, very difficult patches. And I also committed myself to sustaining hope instead of giving in to despair, and attempting to remain grounded in each moment, allowing me to decide the best course of action in line with my intentions, rather than being hijacked by my emotions or getting caught up in my brain's what if and if only thought loops, which just seem to pour more fuel on the fire of procrastination and doubt. So just as a motor racing team can make adjustments to their car to suit a specific racetrack, such as adding some downforce or changing some tire pressures, how could I make adjustments to my senses and my awareness to better suit a new, calmer way of living? And as I practiced, I discovered my life could be split into two distinct realms. The first realm was of tangible objects which could be measured and explained by science, such as trees and people. And in this domain, there was a clear cause and effect type relationship between those individuals and those objects. However, in the second domain, which was intangible and immeasurable and invisible, it consisted of energetic forces that I couldn't see and I couldn't touch and I couldn't really comprehend. Things like love and fear and connection and courage. And those forces or energies or emotions might change instantly, affecting me and overwhelming me or underwhelming me. And they were seemingly operating outside of the laws of nature that I was taught to understand. And the more I considered what I wanted from life, the more I realized that most of my desires fell within this second intangible, non-physical, non-linear realm. I did want to experience love, self-confidence, calmness, purpose, motivation, and trust. But there were no scientific formulas to explain how I might achieve these subjective realities and these emotional and energetic experiences. And this is what set me off on my journey to say, rather than just believing everything I'd been taught, I decided that I would test everything out of myself to see what might happen if I surrendered to all my fears and if I just simply tried doing new things, thus giving me experience and knowledge rather than just knowledge but not from experience. And I think I ended up with a common sense rather than just an intellectual perspective. And I was astonished to discover that I could influence my biology. I could adjust my internal chemistry. I could modify my cell configurations. I could desensitize my senses, and I could change how my brain processed information. And even more shockingly, if I didn't do those things, my brain and body would be running me. The horse would dominate the rider, whereas I wanted my rider to calmly influence my horse. And with this new information, suddenly I could comprehend how cults could brainwash people, how government intelligence agencies or armies could train their operatives to coerce, to manipulate, or to even kill, how hypnotists and conjurers could trick a person's brain right in front of them, okay? And why the governments, the mainstream media and marketing companies, corporations were spending millions of dollars each year to educate, brainwash, coerce, nudge, drive, compel, encourage, and program me to suit their needs and their agendas. Like everybody else, my brain had been well and truly programmed to believe what it was told, to trust authority, and to follow the rules, rather than asking common sense questions like, well, what if the rules are silly? Or is taking this action actually in my best interest? And I gained a new perspective on life that made me identify more as a libertarian who decided to take greater responsibility for myself. A big transition from my previous anxious self who sought safety by pleasing others, following rules, or doing what was considered to be the right thing in any moment. And I have to be honest, I found this new form of self-governance quite a refreshing experience. Therefore, it was necessary for me to work as hard as society was to reprogram my brain. Otherwise, it would be their programs running in my unconscious brain rather than mine. And even now, after 20 years and daily defending my easily trickable unconscious brain from the constant social media, news and advertising bombardment, I still have moments where I'm truly horrified to the degree that I'm still being unconsciously influenced. I think it's hard to acknowledge just how powerful we humans can be when we are adjusted to suit the right racetrack, when we're set up for intentions, when we are set up to perceive energy and think in terms of energy, when we are adjusted to look for action, optimism, health, creativity, trust and bravery, okay? And it seems this secret to our emotional well-being is something that those in power would rather keep hidden from us, that we are actually amazing creatures if we could only trust ourselves. One of my early mentors, he said to me, John, people lack a vivid and captivating dream that motivates them to take action. As a result, they don't do what they believe is expected of them based on the programming that they received during their childhood. And as Henry Thoreau wrote, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And I see this to be true, but I don't want that for myself, and I don't want that for you either, okay? So my big picture story is my desire to make living my life the expression of my art, okay? Through how I talk, through what I do, through what I won't do, through creativity, through integrity, through truth, and through love. And who I ultimately become will be the masterpiece that I'm working on. If I reflect back on the first half of my life, I thought that it was what I owned or what I achieved that would define me or become the measure of my success. However, these days it's clear to me now it's who I have become. And it's who I still might become, which has been the most magnificent achievement of my life. To come from anxiety and OCD and depression to somebody that doesn't have them anymore. It's magnificent. Right? I use my observer in conjunction with my conscious mind to ERP my frightened donkey into becoming a magnificent horse. So the dream I dream for myself is the dream of inner self-mastery. The ability to guide myself into becoming the best loving, creative and calm man that I can be. To be the king of my inner reality, to know who I am and what I want, and to, as best I can, try to make my subjective life, my inner reality, my experience of life as nice as possible. The old me attempted to make the external world pleasant so that I would feel good. But now I focus on making my inner world good so the external world feels pleasant. Therefore, no matter what I do in life, as long as I bring the best me to that action, regardless of any outcome, I will always know that I tried. And I can be proud about that, and I can feel good about that. So what I'm suggesting is, how might you borrow this model, adapt it to suit yourself, or develop your own story that you would like your unconscious brain to accept as true, so that it stops tormenting you and sabotaging you. It doesn't have to be true. You can create any dream inside your head. Everything's fine. Now, my model has 6 perspectives from which I observe my life experience. The first one is my observer, which I define as conscious awareness. I don't mean my conscious brain. I mean an awareness within me that is above my physical body and that is above my brain. If my brain is talking to me, there has to be a part of me that's listening to it. Yeah? So this is my observer. The second way I see myself is simply as my animal central nervous system and brain. And they sit on the darkness of my insides, and I seemingly have learned how to figure out how it functions. And I've discovered how to trick it. I've discovered how to calm it down. And I've figured out how I could desensitize it from fear and excessive thinking. The third way is I see myself as my human biology. The fact that I am a giant chemistry set. Cells can be re-engineered. Immunity can be enhanced. Metabolic diseases can be minimized. Health can be increased. Right? And stress can definitely be lowered, and it should be at every opportunity. The fourth way is I observe myself as energy. Underneath everything, I'm made of atoms, which live in a sea of invisible energy that binds us and communicates across our whole universe. My fifth perspective is my story of this animal pretending to be a human, and how he might guide himself within his life. What skills does he need to be learned, or what parts of him needs to be improved, what parts of him needs to be accepted? How can I grow to maximize my experience through learning new things? And then finally, the sixth model is my soul's perspective. Because yes, my body is having this particular one-off mortal experience, but to me, my soul is immortal. Okay? And what might my soul require of this life, and how might it connect more deeply with the universe, nature, divinity, whatever word you want to use. And over the last 20 years, working on those 6 different perspectives has allowed me to optimize each aspect of myself for the function it has for me, rather than just trying to find one model that works for all aspects of me, which I think is impossible. And this is the path that people study, looking for one unified answer, and there isn't one. And you look back and suddenly 20 years of your life is gone. And remember from video 44, organisms that look for fitness payoffs always outperform those looking to understand reality, because doing then thinking is always more successful than thinking but not doing. So if you can find a model that works for you, regardless of its truth, it will allow you to think less and act more. Okay, I'd like to expand on each of these perspectives so I can share with you how I interact with them, give you some ideas, some concepts that you can play around with. If we jump back to the first one, my observer, as I've said many times, it is the part of me that looks out of my eyes, or if my eyes are closed, it just looks at my mind screen. My observer is my awareness, or it's my attention. It's a formless part of me that watches whatever the thoughts the brain proposes and looks out of my eyes and just looks at all the stuff that's going around. It observes everything that's happening around me. To the best of my ability, I attempt to identify myself as this formless aspect of awareness, not as my body and not as my brain. Can I explain this? Within my own inner dialogue, rather than saying my thoughts, I say to myself, the thoughts. Or rather than saying, my body is anxious, I'll go, the body is anxious. This separation makes a big difference. So as I aligned with my identity, with my observer's attention, I soon noticed that wherever I placed my attention dictated where my energy would flow, and thus it would energize some sort of response. If I were to place my awareness on a past event, stories of that event might rise up on my mind screen, and then my body may become emotionally charged with a memory of that event. If I were to place my awareness on another person, that may energize me into contacting them, or thinking about wanting to be with them, or it may invoke a feeling of anger, regret, guilt, grief, or some other emotion. If I place my awareness on writing, thoughts about that topic begin to emerge, and I start typing, and something begins to become created. So, because where my attention goes is where my energy flows, I have to be careful about where I choose to place my attention. I've had to learn how to use it wisely in the now, on my intentions to make things happen, rather than wasting it, okay, on if-only stories about the past or what-if stories about the future, each of which are a complete waste of my time and energy because they're not happening in the now. Hope this is making sense. I've also had to learn how to turn off that energy flow. So if I'm observing something that is out of my control or not aligned with my intentions, so that my body or that event isn't energized with the energy that I don't want to waste. So this is why I don't watch the news, and I have perfected my NMP, not my problem mantra. So I can observe what's happening around me, yet consciously detach, so my energy is not wasted and my body is not emotionally charged. This is also why I won't watch murderous or scary films, and I won't play violent computer games, as I don't want those life-depleting stories energizing my thoughts. I hope this is making sense. And if it is making sense, you'll see now why the observer, its intention, and the energy available to us plays such an important role in quantum mechanics of the collapsing of the wave-like energetic cloud of potentiality down from energy into matter and into actuality. So though my observer can't control outcomes, he most certainly can influence and energize or not everything in the atomic field around me. Yeah? Just from where and how I consciously place my awareness. To me, this simple model shows so clearly why an OCD person like Elon Musk, who's obsessively focusing his awareness on the intentions he does want to happen, largely has those things happen to some degree, whereas an OCD person whose awareness is focused on what they don't want or all the things that will go wrong is unknowingly energizing at best nervous inactivity, and at worst creating the very thing that they fear. And this is why I've had to learn how to decide what I want, and then to keep consciously and positively talking myself into taking those actions and not wasting my energy by placing my awareness on anything else. Know what you want and keep talking yourself into it. And to take those actions in line with your intentions, regardless of what my brain was telling me or how my body felt. So what if I was scared? So what if I was anxious? So what if I didn't think I could do it? I could still step forward and try. This is game-changing stuff. It's quite simple, really, but we were never taught this way of automatically being part of nature rather than seeing ourselves as a standalone human within nature. Where I place my attention is one of the few things that I can consciously control. I can choose to look at this. I can choose to think about that. Okay. The trouble is, when you place your attention on something, it's so easily distracted. What was that noise? Oh, my phone has just binged. Someone called my name. Oh, that sounds they're having more fun than me. I wonder what's gone over there. It's so easily distracted. And that's why learning how to meditate was so powerful for me. It helped me guard against my attention being pulled off in different directions, allowing me to stay focused on what I choose to energize, or to simply accept in silence that which is happening around me. As I discussed in video 13, the observer seems to mature around the age of 18, and thereafter, no matter how old your body becomes, you still feel like you're about 18 on the inside. I think I said before, the day before my father died, he said to me, "John, this is crazy, being in this old body, because I still feel like I'm 16 or 18 on the inside." I think this observer, this essence of self, is an energy form, like a thought might be. And upon death, if you think life ends there, this energy form just dissipates back into nature, the lights switch off, and all is well. And if you believe part of you leaves the body once it dies, as I do, then I'll be talking about this later on when I talk about the soul. So this observer perspective forms the basis for my horse and rider metaphor, whereby I see my observer or my soul as the rider of my horse, which is my self-contained human body. The horse, my body, doesn't need my rider. Like in a coma, the body just does what it needs to do to survive and repair itself. But my rider, my soul, needs my horse to get around and achieve everything it wishes to accomplish in this lifetime. And even if my body doesn't want to accomplish anything and it wants to stay at home and be afraid, that's not necessarily the story my soul wants for this life. So this doesn't need to become a battle, but you need to choose who's the boss. Yeah? Is the rider the boss, or is the horse the boss? Yeah? And which perspective of myself would I choose to take my guidance from? To the degree that I have, I've managed to retrain myself to live now from the perspective that my observer or my soul is who I am, and I'm not my body. I can love and enjoy my body, and I can recognize that it's the magnificent tool I use to experience this life with, but to not be too identified with it, and to not dislike it in any way, and to not fear it, because they would only hinder my experience. The second perspective that I use, which is my brain and my central nervous system, I call that my IT department. Namely, my clumsy senses, my conditioned central nervous system, my programmed brain, the reptilian instinctual responses, the emotional limbic yes-no system, and the aftermarket add-on, which is my conscious thinking intellectual brain. I'll discuss how these work in videos 2 and 3, and sometimes it's worth going back and checking them out, okay? And I detail how clumsy and trickable our senses are in video 17. Now, armed with this knowledge, I learned that in any moment, my autonomic nervous system would be either in its sympathetic, stressful, fight, flight, or freeze mode, which was bad for my well-being, or I would be in my parasympathetic mode of rest, digest, and repair, which unstresses my biology, repairs any damage, and recharges my emotional batteries. I had to really accept this, and I had to find ways to continuously trick my biology to remain as possible in this calmness mode, so that my body and my cells will just be repairing themselves, and I will have lots and lots of spare energy. Okay, and I had to retrain the brain's amygdala to reclassify old fearful associations from the unsafe database to the safe database, as I outlined in video 8. And if you're not doing that work at the moment, then you're missing a big trick. It became so evident that negativity, excuse me, negativity, doubt, catastrophizing, pessimism, complaining, and doing drama would trigger my body into stress responses, whilst optimism, trust, acceptance, forgiveness, and letting go would keep my body in the rest, digest, and repair mode, even if I was tricking myself and even if I was fibbing to myself. My inner subjective experience had to trump my outer objective one to the best of my abilities if I wanted the world on the inside to be pleasant. Another model that served me well was to imagine that my central nervous system, my brain, had an imaginary fuse within it, like in an electrical plug. And in an anxious person, this fuse trips if there's too much emotion running through the system from the fight or flight response, or from trapped trauma that's escaping up through the body. And when this fuse trips, blood is pulled back from the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the thinking part of the brain, disabling conscious and rational thinking, causing the person to move into the limbic world, where they will either freeze, angrily lash out, or they will try to escape that situation using the logic of a child, which is just how the system works. Okay. Then once the situation normalizes, even if it was just a virtual reality story of the brain, the conscious thinking mind comes back online again, and the body's left to burn off all the erroneously released stress chemicals as it slowly calms down. I used to think that I couldn't handle certain situations or certain people because I would get triggered, I would get easily upset. Okay. However, I learned I could improve my ability to handle discomfort, which is ERP, which metaphorically is upgrading the rating of my fuse. This meant by not avoiding, but by stepping into fear, okay, and exposing myself to uncomfortable situations, and then using techniques to calm my mind down and my body down really, really quickly into a parasympathetic, relaxed state. And as I practiced handling these situations, they became easier, and my fuse became stronger. Until now, I've got a very, very high-powered fuse, okay? And everything now is my new normal. And I feel more confident in my ability to handle bigger and bigger challenging situations. I've taken my fuse from an easily trippable and anxious 3 amps to a rating where it's almost impossible to trip my system into anxiety. Therefore, no matter what's happening around me, I'm not overwhelmed. And if I'm not overwhelmed, I can keep my rational mind engaged, allowing me to function well in any situation, thus raising my confidence and my self-worth. And this means because I can handle life, I can be of more use to nature. Therefore, nature allows me to access more of its powerful energy attractor fields. And lastly, I've come to the realization that my mind is like a blank canvas, which my imagination can use to visualize its ideas. And though the ideas of my brain, the ideas of the brain, may vary from beautiful to really quite horrific, okay? And though they may include all forms of perversion, sexuality, violence, contamination, these inputs are just the product of my incredible imagination in action, playing out on my wonderful mind screen, inspiring me to decide which of these many ideas might I desire to nurture into creation through my intentions and my actions in the outer world. I learned to stop fearing my thoughts. I learned to stop giving them any meaning and to just embrace them as just a part of the brain. Yeah? And I soon learned that I could use my integrity or my intentions to be the arbiter of my actions, not waiting for the horrible thoughts in my head to stop, thinking that they are the truth. They're not, they're just thoughts. You wouldn't have OCD if you didn't have a creative mind, okay? But the question is, are you using that creative imagination to scare yourself, or are you using that do you have an outlet for that creative imagination in the real world? And this is a big subject that the person has really got to start thinking about. And finally, as I got less identified with the thoughts of the brain, I discovered that there was a silence beneath it. And in that stillness was the flow state of creativity and deep connection with nature and intuition, which I soon learned that I could trust. And I talk about this in video 35 and 37. We think, or the brain thinks it needs to think about everything to understand anything, but underneath it, you don't think about anything, and there's this connection, and there's like a knowingness that's always been here from all the years we've been on these planets. Now, the third perspective was to consider my body not just as an animal with basic creature needs for food, reproduction, shelter, survival, and tribal integration, but also as a huge chemistry set. And if I wasn't optimizing the release of pleasant and healthy chemicals within me, I would be missing a powerful opportunity for change. And I found it liberating to accept that beneath all my human conditioning, I was still an animal. And therefore, I shouldn't fear my emotions of anger or selfishness or sexual desire, pain, frustration, or any other biological urges, as these were completely natural for that animal part of me. I could embrace them and allow them to be. But it didn't mean I have to act on them, or I could if I wished. It was my choice via the acceptance of who I was choosing to become and what I would do and what I wouldn't do. As I've said many times, we are emotional creatures who've learned how to think, and my life changed exponentially as I stopped identifying as a thinking creature who tried to avoid his emotions. Emotions are just energy in motion, emotions. They come and they go. And as we learn to handle them by raising our fuse rating through the ERP and not fighting them, everything changes. Now, models 2 and 3 share an important component, which I call the 6-month emotional energy battery, as you may remember from video 4. A healthy human being seems to be able to handle about 6 months of trauma or stress or injury, grief, disruption, or emotional pain before it becomes emotionally or biologically exhausted. And once that battery gets flat, this triggers our natural life-preserving response by unconsciously sabotaging us to pull us back from that stressful way of being via introducing anxiety or illness or depression. So we're out of life and away from those stressors. As far as our unconscious is concerned, we can recharge our biology. Now, in 80% of people, this sabotage will try to make them stay at home or pull them out of a relationship. Whilst the other 20%, who are normally more extroverted, they get anxious at home and will desire to escape the stresses of their home environment. And once that emotional battery becomes depleted, it causes 3 further issues. Firstly, it suppresses the person's ability to make decisions. And the reason is because we make decisions with our feelings, not our thoughts. We make decisions with our feelings and we justify them with thoughts. Therefore, I had to learn to make decisions based on what would be good for my life, not would help me avoid my anxiety or my fears. Secondly, I came to the realization that when I did good things, like my battery was flat, it didn't feel good. Okay? How can it make me feel good if the battery is flat? Therefore, I had to begin my recovery despite feeling exhausted, instead of falling into the trap of waiting until I wasn't exhausted before I could take action. So this meant I had to go and do good things for myself, like socializing, getting fit and healthy, changing my job, even though I didn't feel like doing any of them at that time. And thirdly, I had to acknowledge that even as I took action and stopped worrying, it would take 4 to 6 months of living that new way for my emotional battery to slowly recharge before I might start to feel good again. Yeah? And then the unconscious sabotage will start to back off. So I had to learn to be consistent and to apply myself and to be patient. And then I was introduced to epigenetics. And I have to say, it just blew my mind. The concept that many diseases that we thought were inherited or genetic or they ran in the family, that was turned upside down by the discovery that mostly it wasn't the parents' genes, but the parents' behaviors that had caused their children to express those similar genes. The behavior of anxious parents trained anxious children. Angry parents trained angry children. Depressed parents trained depressed children to think, behave, worry, and live in a similar fashion. Therefore, the behaviors of worrying, stressing, eating, being angry, etc., anxious, over time, signaled the genes to either express or not express themselves. This meant our bloodstream, or whatever emotional peptides were being released into it, would be the messenger to tell our cells to express certain genes. And the biggest contributor to releasing chemicals in our bloodstream is our thoughts. This means a happy person in a bad job may have a healthier chemical soup than a stressed person in a great job. A person with a poor diet but with positive attitude may have a healthier chemical soup than a vegetarian who's eating well but is stressed about the plight of animals. A calm person in an anxiety-ridden environment may have a healthier chemical soup than an anxious person in a calm environment. And this clearly demonstrated to me why worried and stressed people had far more illness than calm people. And it woke me up to the realization that if I watched a comedy TV show, I would be laughing and I would be releasing happy chemicals into my bloodstream, and that even if I just pretended to laugh or just smiled at everybody as I walked around, this would trick my body into releasing even more feel-good chemicals because I am a giant chemistry set. So I consciously decided to stop complaining. I consciously decided to be more optimistic. I consciously decided to try and be more funny. I consciously decided to be calm and to be in love, okay? As these were the chemicals like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin that I wanted flowing through me, not adrenaline and cortisol. To really get your mind around this is very empowering. And I stopped feeling anxious when I stopped thinking and behaving in anxious ways. It's common sense, really, yet I think the medical world fails to grasp this simple concept. Okay. In this biological phase, I also decided to take more responsibility for what I put into my body, what food I took. And I had to embrace the fact that sugar, carbohydrates, wheat, flour, and processed foods were provably bad for my body, no matter how much I liked them. And it pleasantly shocked me to find that removing these foods from my diet lifted my mood. It reduced my anxiety, and it boosted my energy levels, and it made my brain run faster. This ketogenic way of eating encouraged my cells to feed from slow burn fats, which encouraged the sensation of satiation, rather than my cells feeding from fast burn sugars, which tricked the body into craving more carbs all of the time. And I was really surprised at the simplicity of this model. If there were sugars in my diet, my cells would feed from the sugars before they fed from any fat in my body. And once they had enough sugar to feed off of, any remaining sugar in my system would then be stored as more fat. And then as the cells needed to feed again, they would default to looking for more sugar or setting up a craving within me to eat sugar rather than just feeding off my existing fat. Therefore, to burn off my existing fat, it made sense for me to cut out sugars and carbs from my diet completely and train my body to primarily feed from fats. Plus this high fat, medium protein and low carbohydrate metabolically based eating strategy, it seems to minimize type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer and dementia, or at least makes those conditions harder to establish. And I like the idea of that. I like the concept of that. Okay. Let's jump to model 4, which I call my atomic energy model. And I discussed this in video 9 and video 37. In models 2 and 3, I observed my body as matter, which I could see and touch, and therefore it felt real to me. However, that matter is made from atoms, and atoms are just little balls of energy spinning so fast that they seem solid, but in truth are just protons and neutrons surrounded by a cloud of electrons. From this perspective, I could see I was fundamentally a mass of energy, a clump of 27 billion atoms held together, forming a self-propelling, self-repairing, self-replicating, self-thinking biological creature called John's body, whose unconscious, animalistic and automatic shenanigans were watched by John's observer. And these atoms are held together to form the body by an energetic life force, which we might call chi or prana. And when that life force expired, or if that life force were to be severed by an accident, those atoms would become de-energized, separate, and then just flow back into nature to be used elsewhere. And all that would remain afterwards would be that which there was before, which is the immortal observer, consciousness, awareness, a single point expression of nature or divinity. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in a higher power. And this model better enabled me to comprehend the concept of nature or God being both transcendent and immanent. And that my biggest obstacle to accessing God was my ego, which was of the brain and the body, and who thought that without him that I would flounder and die. But once I became the observer, I could see that beneath all the ego's fears was everything that I'd unknowingly been searching for. And as I associated more with my observer, or my soul, I could comprehend there was an aspect of God being immanent, meaning within me, and that once the atoms fell away at my death, that part would reconnect with the transcendent God, the God or source outside of me, and then I would be home. Now, I'm not saying this is the truth, but it's the truth as I would like to live my life by, and it's the truth that I would like my unconscious brain to believe. Plus, the more I live this way, the more it seems to be true through my experiences, which is my inner reality. So I also find this model very, very comforting. And by associating God more with energy, knowledge, love, and doing good, technically for me, this is quite a compelling perspective, free from restrictive religious and seemingly man-made doctrines. The atomic energy model brings in other perspectives that I really like too. And the first one is that knowledge can be transferred to me via light or sound through energetic attractor fields around me that we can't see. Much like we can download a movie through a fiber optic cable or through Wi-Fi or 5G or the like. Therefore, when nature's ready, when God's ready, okay, information can be made available to me, downloaded into me, concordant with that which I can handle via my mindset, the fuse rating of my central nervous system, the frequency I vibrate, and my ability to try new things. And this is so beautifully represented by the David Hawkins map of consciousness, which I detailed in video 37 part 2. As my whole mass of atoms begin to vibrate at a higher frequency, more energy can be accessed, and nature begins to attract opportunities of a similar energy towards my intentions. Now, I must be honest with you, this was the hardest part of me to get my head around, because it's such a huge and mostly unknowable topic. Plus the laws of physics at that micro-foundational energetic quantum subatomic level are amazingly different to the laws I was taught at school, which govern us when all these atoms are grouped together to form a macro structure such as the body. I guess the point I'm trying to make is I am both the energetic micro world and the organic macro world. Yeah? And common sense told me that the biggest rewards for my growth would come from thinking and acting from the fundamental energy perspective than solely working on the secondary organic perspective. If I could energetically vibrate crisply and effectively in an optimal high frequency, high amperage environment, most of the organic stresses in my body and my brain would just naturally dissipate, and I would have more energy, and I would be more use to nature, divinity, and everybody around me. So for me, this state is beneath the body's thinking brain, where intuition comes to the fore. And that intuition is beyond the body's 5 main senses. Okay? It's my energetic awareness that beneath all of my senses is reading the energetic fields of nature. And it is reading the energetic fields of people around me, allowing me to use my intuition to intuit their needs from a more holistic perspective. So my perspectives grew to incorporate this style of observing myself. And not only did I need to keep my physical body fit and recharged and healthy biologically, but I also needed a plan to keep my atomic energy body healthy too. So I introduced to myself the concept of energetic health. Was my energy field optimal, or was I carrying around trapped trauma, low frequency thought fields, or having other energy leeches feeding from me? Now, because understanding how energy works is complex, it's hard to measure, and for some people, and it was me in the beginning, too much of a jump to even believe, I'm going to keep this simple. So concepts such as past life trauma, chakra blockages, soul retrieval, ancestral traumas, which I used to scoff about, but now I've experienced to be true, I'm going to save for another video. And I'm also going to defer talking about the 9 dimensions that energy seems to operate within, of which we live in the 3rd dimension. For now, I just want to focus on trapped trauma, as I originally described to you in video 9, where I said if emotions are not allowed to flow freely through us and out of us, if they're repressed or held down, that excess energy has to go somewhere. And I like to imagine that the excess energy gets stored in the atoms of our body or in our energy field. It's only a metaphor, but I see it similar to how massive volume of gas can be compressed down and stored in a small metal gas canister, causing that energy to be condensed and to vibrate more slowly as it becomes denser and heavier, until the atom becomes full and it seals itself off And then once that atom is full, the next one begins to store the remainder of that energy, and so on until all of that trapped, held down energy has been stored, or until the stress of that situation has passed away. But eventually, the person is left with clusters of atoms charged to the brim, held under stress, all holding down all that potential energy, which is just waiting for the opportunity to blast out as useful kinetic energy, which would energize the field of that person. The denser our store of trapped trauma and the energy that's held down there, the slower we vibrate, and the more stress is placed biologically on our body. So all that dead weight, okay, potential energy held in your atoms needs to be released from potential energy to kinetic energy. And as it flows through you, it will feel like a panic attack. But it's not, okay? And you sitting with this and letting it happen will desensitize your body, and it will release this energy out of you. I call the storage of all that stuck energy your atomic energy battery. And unlike the emotional energy battery, which requires to be recharged, the atomic energy battery needs to be vented and discharged. When full, it holds you in the lower energy fields, depleting your biological energy, and like a magnet, attracts low energy events and low energy people towards you. However, as you learn to become more comfortable with discomfort of the emotions and you let them move through you, they begin to discharge, moving you up to higher energy levels. And if we jump back to the emotional energy battery, which we desire to recharge by thinking and worrying less, this can be charged from other sources too. And because atoms naturally transport energy from one place to another, your emotional energy battery can be helpfully recharged from energetic sources like being near the sea, when it's all crashing around and waves in the Alps. It can be recharged from basking in the sun, visiting high energy locations, and being around high energy individuals. But it's also meant that I had to, as best I could, avoid locations, individuals, and activities that were low energy and could potentially drain me. Now, initially I could comprehend this model, but because my primary 5 senses weren't optimized for this invisible and unmeasurable energy model, it was hard for me to sense that it was true. And years ago, my previous reliance on logical reasoning very often made it difficult for me to accept this model, which I sensed to be true but couldn't prove. Despite that, I took a leap of faith, and what I discovered was life-changing. And I would encourage you to do it, but you've got to go and find out for yourself. Now, the last part of this energetic model took me quite a while to understand. However, once I did, it answered many questions. In our human macro world of matter, things seem to happen in a linear causation manner, like a this causes a that. And classically, this is called Newtonian physics, meaning everything needs to be mechanically and mathematically provable and linked together. That which you can see and measure is scientific, and everything else is speculation or pseudoscience. Though this seems to be logical, this is a glass ceiling that limits our growth. Because when we view life energetically from a tiny quantum perspective, the laws of physics are so different. Do you remember in video 10 when I said it's always now? Yeah? And we are stationary, and time comes at us. Here's the next now, and here's the next now, and here's the next now, and we can look back on all the old nows that's forming our past. But what if in each nearly now moment, at a subatomic level, all the atoms in their environment were waiting in a cloud of potentiality, ready to collapse into actuality, influenced by the observer, which is us, our energy level, and the intentions that we hold in mind. Quantum physics points to this being true, and it says that the observer and their thoughts affect the cloud as it collapses to create the next moment of now. Now you have to think about this. Could this be why people who think they are lucky have lucky things happen to them, and those who think they're going to fail often do? Perhaps you'll now see how optimism, having clear intentions, and raising your atomic energy levels can make such a huge difference. Think about it. Everything ever designed and made, from Concorde to the Eiffel Tower, started off as a thought in someone's head that energized an action which created an outcome. So in my world, I don't wait until the right time comes, as that's just a procrastination trap. In every now moment, I'm imagining the outcomes I wish for, and I hope to influence in that moment in some way to be in my favor. Another way of looking at that is, over the years, I've heard many spiritual teachers use the phrase, live your life like a prayer. And once I adopted this model, it made sense. I now have an almost continuous inner dialogue with nature or the godly verse, okay, communicating what I'm looking for, what support I might need, and asking for help, and reminding nature of my intentions for my life and those people around me. It's worth exploring, it really is. Now, my fifth model is the animal pretending to be a human. And it's the mismatch between what I want to be doing and what I actually am doing. Another way of looking at that is, what skills do you need to acquire that will either motivate you into action or enable you to take action effectively? Yeah. And I think that's much of what this course is about. Learning about your personality types, learning relationship skills, social skills, changing attitudes, changing your belief systems, programming your RAS of your brain, chasing fitness payoffs, developing courage, re-engineering your cells, defining intentions, and talking yourself into making it happen. As I keep saying, if you have anxiety, rather than waiting until your anxiety goes, use life now as your exposure therapy. Use whatever action you need to take now to make your intentions happen. They say feel the fear, but do it anyway. It's nearly always easier than you expect, and it's very often different to what your mind will tell you will happen. How does your mind know what's going to happen in the future? We have to stop listening to it. Okay. Now the last section is my model for my soul's journey. As I said before, this is not necessarily the truth. In fact, I'm not looking for the truth, okay? Because searching for truth is not a fitness payoff, it's just a distraction from life, remember? So in my story, I use the concept of soul as an intangible and everlasting essence that animates a person. I believe it embodies a person's awareness, their disposition and ethical compass, which manifests in their emotions, their motivations, and in their innovation. And this is the concept that I wish for my horsey to believe, so he feels more comfortable as I guide him into new destinations and new experiences, as part of him becoming more useful to me through the constant ERP I keep exposing him to. And I imagine that there's a giant invisible sea of energy that engulfs the whole universe and has at least 9 separate yet interconnected dimensions, some of which are dense and heavy, like this third dimension, and others which are more energetic and more ethereal, yet still hold intelligence and consciousness. And in my imagination, there's another dimension that exists where souls are present without bodies. And these souls seem to be engaged in the pursuit of acquiring knowledge. I think if I were the creator of nature, I would have designed it in a manner that encourages these souls to continue learning and to learn how to become creative and to learn how to be more benevolent to everything in nature. And I think the best way to learn everything would be to experience being everything. Therefore, I believe our soul began its journey millions of years ago as an element stuck in a rock. And then it was eroded and ground down, freed and assimilated into the soil. And from the soil, it could evolve into a plant or a fern or a tree, in each carnation. And it experiences the cycles of all plants, coming back, being every plant, okay? And then once it's been through all the plants, it reincarnates through all the insects, the reptiles, the rodents, and finally up to the mammals, until it reaches the human form, the seemingly most advanced creature on the planet. And then the soul reincarnates lifetime after lifetime, taking a new body each time to gain more knowledge and to pay off any negative karma from previous misdeeds against nature. And eventually the soul may reach a point where it's learned all it needs from Earth School, which we might call enlightenment, and its wisdom and value may be utilized elsewhere in the universe. In my model, the planet is circular in nature and cleverly self-sustaining. And what I mean by that is the grass is happy to be eaten by an animal as its soul knows that one day it will become that animal. And an animal is happily eaten by a human because it then entitles him to come back as a human sometime. Now, I've got to be honest with you. I don't really care if this is true or not, but I really like the story. And it's the story I want my unconscious brain to believe, as it will then shut up and allow me to get on with all the things I need to do in this life, in my now. And once your soul has done all the rounds with all the plants and all the creatures, keeps returning as a human until he learns how to handle all aspects of life without fear and with love. And I've often wondered whether individuals who identify as the other gender, of their biological sex, are simply experiencing that gender for the first time. Perhaps as the soul separates from its higher self and forgets past experiences, there are faint echoes of memories from their former gender. I don't know if that's true, but it kind of makes sense to me. More recently, I'm subscribing to the concept that your soul returns to Earth at the same level of consciousness that it left at the last time. And the circumstances that you're born into purposely align with what you still need to learn. How can I expand that? So being born into poverty, being disabled or being abused happens as these were the events you are required to learn from, to learn to rise above. Yeah? Or perhaps you choose those challenges to pay off some negative karma, like you being killed in this lifetime because you killed somebody else in a past lifetime. Now, I quite like that sort of model because there's no external godlike entity judging you. You'll naturally be judged by yourself, by your own actions or your inactions in each lifetime. It really works for me. And more recently too, I'm warming to the concept of soul groups, whereby we swoop in and swoop out as well in large groups, and we have worked with each other over many, many lifetimes, being each other's parents, being each other's siblings, friends, lovers, and we agree beforehand in our higher selves which roles we would play to give the other person the experience of life that they require. And I like this model as it allows us to more easily forgive those who have acted badly towards us. Let me give you an example. Let's say a father disowned his son because he was gay during this lifetime. This could be seen very, very differently if they had already agreed beforehand that that's what would happen, so that the son could learn to transcend rejection, alienation, or whatever that soul particularly needed to learn to overcome in this lifetime. And when all the souls all return eventually back together again, they can all thank each other for fulfilling those roles once their initial memories have been returned by entering back into their higher selves. I believe that each person's soul is a singular point of consciousness that experiences the world in their own unique way. But despite this, we're all interconnected and originate from the same source, ultimately forming a single unit. Similar to how individual drops of water combine to form the vastness of the ocean, our perceived individuality is just one perspective, and we are also part of a larger whole. To me, this means by helping others, I'm ultimately helping myself. And by being nasty to others, I'm ultimately being nasty to myself. It also means that I don't necessarily need to save others. Their karma is their karma to go through and to offset and to deal with. And by focusing on my own growth, once again, I am ultimately helping everybody by raising the level of consciousness for the whole planet. And once again, I like that concept. And if I'm going to choose to believe in reincarnation, I may as well try and make it smart and to serve my brain and my subjective reality to the best I can. Can you see that we're all dreaming a dream of life, of our subjective reality? So why can't we make that dream as practical and as nice as possible? So in my story, the soul enters the fetus just before birth, and sometime during some humans' lives, awareness may become aware of its own awareness, and thus becomes the rider of its horse, and then it can influence that horse or use that horse as its mechanism to get around and do all the things it needs to do and to become all it can be. I also have a different perspective that helps me accept the chaos of the world. I don't believe that Earth needs to be a perfect utopia where everybody lives in harmony. If we didn't have disasters and wars, cultural diversity, dangerous animals, disease, corporate and government greed, and all the control systems, we wouldn't have the challenges that we need to grow as individuals. People have different ways of awakening, some by seeing the good and others by seeing the worst. It's not necessary to fear the bad, since everything happens for us, not to us, because it's all part of our journey towards growth and enlightenment. Our environment is full of opportunities for growth, and if the Earth were perfect, nature would need to create another planet to send us to where there's chaos so that we can learn. And as souls become more attuned to their spiritual selves, their connection to the non-linear realm of energy and nature just becomes stronger and stronger. And this heightened state of awareness, David Hawkins calls level 200. It's where negativity is transformed into positivity through truth. And it's a space where courage and honesty flourish within a powerful energy field that not only energizes the individual, but also affects the observer's intentions. The way I visualize this is by going back to the atomic battery I mentioned earlier. In my story, the spiritual goal is to completely discharge the atomic battery by becoming high energy and high frequency. And I imagine that each lifetime, anything bad you do takes the emotional energy, the negative charge of that action, and compresses it into a tiny atomic charge that's then stored in your atomic energy battery. It's not for this video, but this simplistic model also points to how chakras and energy meridian systems can become cleared and energized by releasing trapped energies from our many past incarnations, most of which we have no memories or no conscious memories of, though the traumas may still be stored between our body and our energetic field. Whenever we release pent-up emotions and negative energy, we feel a surge of energy as our stored potential energy is released. And this energy flows through our body, energizing our ethereal field and elevating our level of consciousness, which naturally shifts how we comprehend life in more positive and holistic ways. This is why we mustn't fear our emotions, and we mustn't keep them held down or suppressed, as I've explained throughout this whole course. Okay, well, this is just my story. Okay, but my experience supports that something like this is seemingly happening, although I could never know the truth, as nature is just too complex and too powerful to comprehend. So in summary, all I'm asking you is, what does reality mean to you? And can you dream a new dream within yourself, so that your inner subjective reality can be a beautiful place, regardless of what is happening in the objective outer reality? And can you find the courage to become all you can become? And might you borrow my model to see what happens when you view yourself from these 6 different perspectives? And as ever, there's no right way and there's no wrong way. It's just, what is the path that you can find for yourself that works for yourself? Okay, lots to think about. Good luck looking at that. You may need to watch this video a couple of times. Once again, thank you for all your support. I'm going to get working on the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.